Mike, I'm curious. You talked a little bit about it earlier, near-death experiences, and you've discussed in your book, but also in many other programs that I've watched with you, these remarkable cases for terminal lucidity and near-death experiences, and basically how these phenomena challenge materialism. And I was wondering if we could dig into a couple of the more remarkable cases that would be more persuasive, let's say, to skeptics of this, Mike.
Sure. Near-death experiences. First of all, there have been millions of near-death experiences over time. There's an author named Carol Zaleski who's written a wonderful book called Otherworld Journeys, and she's done a survey of historical near-death experiences dating back thousands of years in various cultures. It's a fascinating book, Otherworld Journeys by Carol Zaleski, and so millions and millions of people have had these experiences. There have been surveys done of the American public, and at least 20 million people now living in the U.S. have either had a near-death experience or will have one at some point in their lifetime. So these are very common, and most near-death experiences happen in chaotic situations where a person, say, is in a hospital, they have a cardiac arrest, and all chaos breaks out, and people they get CPR, they get resuscitated. So it's not a good setting to do carefully planned science. You're trying to save the guy's life, and people have these experiences. There was one near-death experience that was very carefully planned. And has been studied in great detail, and that's of a woman called Pam Reynolds. Pam Reynolds was a woman in her mid-30s, back around 1991, I believe, who was found to have an aneurysm on a vital artery at the base of her brain. And in order to fix the aneurysm, because it was about to burst, she needed a special kind of operation called a standstill procedure. It was a procedure that was done very rarely, and was done by a neurosurgeon in Phoenix, Arizona, named Robert Spetzler, who was the world's expert on this. And what Dr. Spetzler had to do was he had to put her under anesthesia. He cooled her body down to about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. He then put her on a heart-lung machine. He stopped her heart, stopped the heart-lung machine, then tilted her body up to drain all the blood out of her brain. And he had about 30 minutes to fix the aneurysm. And he had to have her completely dead, actually, in order to fix the aneurysm, because if there was any blood flowing inside the aneurysm, he technically couldn't fix it. So he did the operation. It went very well. She made a good recovery. After they finished fixing the aneurysm, they started her heart again. They brought her body temperature back up, and she recovered. So after the surgery, she told him that she watched the operation, and he didn't at first believe her until she began telling him the conversations that he had had during the surgery. She described the instruments he was using in quite a bit of detail. She described all the people who were in the room. She described what they all said. She even described the music that was playing in the room while she was dead, while her brain was drained of blood. She knew everything that was going on. She said what happened was, as soon as her heart stopped, she popped out of her body. She said it felt almost like a physical pop, and she floated to the ceiling, and she was able to see her own body and the whole operating room. And she watched. She said it was kind of fascinating. She wasn't frightened. It was actually a very pleasant feeling. And then she saw a tunnel. So she felt herself being drawn into the tunnel, went down the tunnel, came out on the other side of the tunnel, saw a beautiful world. She saw some dead relatives, I think her grandparents or something. And they told her that she had to go back. She couldn't cross over to the next life yet because she had children to raise. So she had 3 kids. So she went back down the tunnel into the operating room, and she went back into her body. And she said going back into her body felt like jumping into a pool of ice water, which it was, because her body temperature was 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I use her example because she was very carefully monitored, meaning her brain waves were monitored. Her vital signs were all monitored. They were sure she was dead. They were sure her brain was not working. In fact, her being dead was part of the operation, and she still had a full experience of what was going on.
Wow.
So when I discuss this with skeptics on near-death experiences, I call it the Pam Reynolds challenge. That is, that if one is skeptical of near-death experiences, you have to explain what happened to her, and it's very well documented. And there are 4 characteristics of near-death experiences that skeptics cannot explain. And skeptics will try all sorts of things. They'll say, well, it's some kind of strange seizure. Maybe it's wishful thinking. It's a result of some of the medications they were given at the time of the resuscitation. They make all kinds of excuses for what it is. But what skeptics can't explain are 4 things. One is that near-death experiences typically are very clear, coherent, hyper-real experiences, which is not what you get if your brain is lacking oxygen. I've seen a lot of people who they didn't have good blood flow to their brain. They didn't have good oxygen. It doesn't make you smarter. It doesn't make you better. But when you have a near-death experience, your consciousness is better than it is when you're in your body. The second thing is that people have confirmable out-of-body experiences, meaning they leave their body and they can see things and know things and hear things that they could not have known if they were still in their body. Like Pam Reynolds, when she was medically, legally dead, she heard all the conversations in the operating room. She saw the surgery and she could describe the surgery. The third thing, which I think is a fascinating observation, is that, to my knowledge, in all the scientific literature of near-death experiences, and there have been thousands of reports of near-death experiences, no one has ever reported seeing at the other end of the proverbial tunnel a living person. That is, that when people see people at the other end of the tunnel, they're always dead people, even if the experiencer didn't know they were dead. That is, there have been instances where people have been in car accidents where there were multiple people in the car, and different people, injured people, were sent to different hospitals. And a person had a near-death experience. A number of people have had them, where they will see someone in the car on the other end of the tunnel, but not other people. But the only people they see on the other end of the tunnel are people in the car who died, and they didn't know they died because they died at a different hospital. The fourth characteristic of near-death experiences that point to their validity is that near-death experiences are usually transformative. That is, the people who have them usually lose their fear of death. They're different people afterwards. Something happens when people have that experience, when people see the other side. It's clearly something that transcends ordinary life or mortal life. So near-death experiences, there's a lot of science behind them, and anyone who's skeptical of them, I always say you have to explain the Pam Reynolds experience. You have to explain her and people like her who have these experiences.
Wow, that right there is an excellent answer, Mike. Tons of good points. The Pam Reynolds experience. That would be a difficult one for a skeptic to sufficiently address. And firstly, though, I'd like to say that right there is an example of incredible science in terms of the details that you described of that surgery. Because
Right.
we were talking about earlier, Darwinian evolutionists or neo-Darwinian evolutionists, they'll say, what, you reject Darwinian evolution? I mean, that's scientific. That's where we get our phones and all these engineering feats. And it's like, no, when you're performing surgeries like that, I don't think in the back of your head you're thinking about large-scale Darwinian evolution, right, Mike? I mean,
yeah, Darwinian evolution has been useless to medicine. I mean, for example, it's not taught in medical schools. You don't learn Darwinian evolution in a medical school, for the obvious reason that Darwinian evolution doesn't aid the practice of medicine in any way. It's, in my view, Darwinian evolution is a collection of fairy tales that are told to buttress an atheistic worldview.
and as you said, it's largely junk science. So I agree with you there, Mike.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, many points that you made there. Because when people say, well, we have these really vivid dreams once in a while, or we can hallucinate due to drugs and other things, or maybe the reality of deja vu, these are kind of the mind tricking you. But you made so many points there. What really convinced me of the reality or the truthfulness, Mike, of near-death experiences is what you described there, where, and correct me if I'm wrong, an aspect of this surgery was for Pam Reynolds to basically be in a state of death in order for that surgery to take place, which means what's taking place would have to be above and beyond. And she's describing, and I've heard other cases as well, where they're describing what's going on in, other rooms or
Right.
what's going on below them. How would a skeptic explain that? And then one other point you made too, which I heard for the first time from you. So it is true that in almost all cases, when people having a near-death experience, Mike, see a relative or someone in general, it's always a dead person.
Yes.
And not wow.
Precisely. And if it was wishful thinking, that's one of the things that people have said, well, you're in this terribly frightening, traumatic experience, and you kind of want to see your mother, you kind of like
Right.
kind of freak out. If it's wishful thinking, people would occasionally see people still living. They'd see their spouse, they would see their brother, they'd see their mother, but that never happens. And to my knowledge, it never has happened. There are a couple kind of paradigmatic examples of that. One was of a little boy, and this happened a couple decades ago, who had a ruptured appendix. And I think his name was Eddie, I believe, in the literature. He was like 8 years old. He had a ruptured appendix, and he nearly died. He had like a medical code, and they resuscitated him. And after he came to, and after he came around, he told his family that he had gone down a tunnel, and he had seen Jesus, and went through a real near-death experience. And he said that he saw his sister at the other end of the tunnel, and his sister was a teenager who was in college. And the family thought that was odd because his sister was still alive. And they got the message that she had just been killed in a car accident. She was at a college distant away. So when he had the experience, she was in fact dead, and he knew she was dead, even though he had not been told that. And there are a number of instances where people have encountered friends or loved ones at the other end of the tunnel when they didn't know they were dead, but they saw them there. And again, I'm not aware of a single report in the near-death literature of anyone who has seen a living friend or relative at the other end of the tunnel.
That's incredible, Mike. I appreciate that. Sam, follow up?
Yeah, I'm assuming that you have peers that you work with, maybe that they understand all of the data, yet they're still not convinced, and it seems like they should provide reasons. So what would you say that some of the best reasons the critics would put forth for rejecting these things, and I guess how would you respond to them?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I've plenty of people I've talked to about this. Frankly, most people agree with me. I mean, that's chatting in the operating room, and chat to friends in the hallway. Most people say, "Oh, yeah, I think you're probably right." People who don't agree generally just evade the evidence. That is, that I'll mention the Pam Reynolds experience, and they'll kind of wave their hand and say, "Oh no, there's an explanation for it. We just haven't figured it out yet." That kind of approach is just evasion of the evidence. You see the same thing with Darwinian evolution. I mean, there are a million holes in Darwinian theory, and when you confront Darwinists with it, invariably they'll say, well, we haven't figured that out yet, but give us a little more time. We'll kind of figure that out. And which I say, that's fine. I mean, that's the way science works. You progress. So I give them my cell phone number and say, when you actually have the evidence, give me a call. But right now you don't have the evidence. So the usual seg that people use when they can't explain things like near-death experiences or the intelligent design of living things and so on is, well, give us a little more time and we'll figure it out. And that's fine. You take all the time you want and give me a call when you actually figure it out. But for right now, you haven't figured it out. And right now, the best modern state of science is that near-death experiences, in many cases, are real experiences of survival after death. And the modern state of science is that Darwinian evolution is full of holes, and no thoughtful scientist should embrace that theory.
Amen.
Yeah, I have the same experience when I engage with unbelievers regularly, and I'll bring this topic up because I think it's a fantastic line of evidence for the supernatural realm, which would have strong theistic implications. I don't know how you could explain it otherwise. And it seems like they'll just hand wave the data away. They'll say that maybe it's not science because it's not peer reviewed. I say, well, hold on. There's journals just for that.
Sure.
There's
Sure.
It's something that is well established at this point. But
Yes.
I don't know what an objection would be. I've not gotten any really that I can think of.
Well, as there are very reliable scientific studies of the public, of looking at people's experiences, and as I pointed out earlier, there are 20 million Americans living today who've either had a near-death experience or will have one at some point in their life. And are they all crazy and lying? There's the evidence is not always of the highest quality, although the evidence with Pam Reynolds is very high quality, but it's not always of the highest quality because these are chaotic situations where you're just trying to save someone's life. But just the volume of evidence is just enormous. And as I said, those four characteristics of near-death experiences, the fact that they're very clear and coherent, the fact that there are out-of-body experiences where they have checkable things that they can see, the fact that they only see dead relatives, and the fact that they're transformative. If you doubt near-death experiences, you have to account for all four of those. And I've never encountered anyone who can account for all four of those without admitting that near-death experiences are real.
That's right. That's great.